Some places do not appear when you are searching for shelter. They appear when the world has taken everything else away. The snow came down hard over Black Hollow Ridge, turning the mountain road into a ribbon of white silence beneath the dying light of evening. Elias Mercer kept both hands tight on the steering wheel of his rusted Ford pickup, his knuckles pale beneath the cold glow of the dashboard. The heater had stopped working nearly 50 miles ago, and every breath inside the cab drifted like smoke into the frozen air. Beside him sat Rook, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a thick silver and cream coat darkened by melting snow along his back. The dog's amber eyes stayed fixed on the forest outside, as if he were listening to something hidden beneath the storm itself. Elias glanced at him briefly before looking back at the road. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" he murmured softly. The truck rattled over loose gravel and patches of ice, sounding more exhausted than mechanical, much like its driver. At 40 years old, Elias carried himself with the quiet endurance of a man who had survived too many winters inside his own mind. His broad shoulders still held traces of military discipline, but the rest of him looked worn by years that never truly let him rest. His dark brown hair had begun turning silver near the temples, and a week's worth of stubble shadowed the hard lines of his face. The divorce papers sat folded inside the glove compartment beside an unpaid motel receipt and a photograph he no longer had the strength to look at. Earlier that morning, his former brother-in-law had placed 2 cardboard boxes on the curb and told him not to come back. No shouting, no cruelty. Somehow that made it worse. Just cold finality. The kind that settles into your chest like winter itself. Rook suddenly lifted his head. His ears stood rigid. A low growl rolled quietly through his throat. Elias frowned. "What is it?" The dog stared toward the trees climbing the rocky hillside to their right. Snow whipped between the pines and silver curtains, but through the storm Elias noticed something strange. A flicker, faint and pale, like light reflecting off stone. Rook barked once, sharp, urgent. Then again, Elias slowed the truck instinctively. The road curved around a ridge, and there, half buried beneath drifting snow and tangled cedar branches, stood a stone house unlike anything he had ever seen. It rose directly from the mountainside itself, built from enormous slabs of dark granite weathered smooth by decades of wind and ice. One narrow chimney leaned crooked against the stormy sky. The windows were black, empty, yet something about the place felt awake, waiting. The truck tires crunched softly as Elias pulled onto the shoulder. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved. Snow hissed against the windshield. Somewhere deeper in the mountain came a low vibration, almost too faint to notice. Elias felt it through the steering wheel before he heard it. A slow pulse beneath the earth. Rook whined softly and pressed his nose against the glass. "Easy," Elias whispered, though his own voice carried uncertainty. The veteran stepped out into knee-deep snow, boots sinking heavily beneath him. Wind swept across the ridge carrying the scent of pine sap, frozen stone, and something older hidden underneath. The stone house stood silent at the edge of the forest, its walls streaked with frost and shadow. Above the doorway hung a rusted lantern gently, swaying though no breeze touched it. Elias approached carefully, his breath clouding before him. Rook stayed close at his side, alert and tense. Then, just as Elias reached the cracked wooden steps, the German shepherd froze completely. His ears twitched toward the ground beneath the house. A deep rumble vibrated through the snow below their feet. Once, then again, slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat buried somewhere far underground. The rumble faded slowly into the mountain, leaving behind a silence so deep Elias could hear snow sliding from the pine branches above. Rook remained frozen near the steps, muscles tense beneath his thick coat, his amber eyes locked on the ground beneath the house. Elias swallowed against the cold knot rising in his throat and looked toward the dark windows again. The place did not feel abandoned. It felt patient. He climbed the wooden steps carefully, each board groaning beneath his boots. The front door hung slightly crooked on rusted hinges, scarred by years of storms and neglect. When Elias pushed against it, the old wood resisted at first before opening inward with a low creak that echoed through the stone structure like a long sleeping breath. Cold air drifted out carrying the scent of ash, cedar, and something metallic hidden deeper inside. Rook entered first. The German shepherd moved cautiously across the dusty floorboards, nails clicking softly in the silence. Inside, the house was larger than Elias expected. Thick stone walls enclosed a narrow living room with a massive fireplace built from black granite. Dust covered everything. An iron lantern rested on a wooden table beside stacks of old books swollen from moisture. Yet strangely, nothing looked destroyed. It looked preserved, as though someone had walked away years ago expecting to return. Snowlight filtered through the windows in pale blue ribbons. Elias set his backpack near the fireplace and rubbed his gloved hands together for warmth. "Could be worse, boy," he said quietly, though exhaustion dragged heavily through his voice. Rook did not respond. The dog had wandered toward the far side of the room where an old cast-iron stove stood against the wall. His ears twitched sharply. Then came the vibration again. Faint, rhythmic. Elias felt it through the floorboards beneath his boots. Once every several seconds. Slow enough to question. Steady enough to fear. The lantern hanging above the table trembled slightly. Dust drifted down from the ceiling beams. Rook lowered his head and released a low growl deep in his chest. Not aggressive. Uneasy. Elias stared toward the floor beneath the stove. "Probably old pipes," he muttered, though he knew the house had no electricity and likely no plumbing left either. He knelt beside the fireplace and began rebuilding the old fire pit from habit more than comfort. Years in the Army Corps of Engineers had taught him how to claim broken spaces and survive inside them. His hands moved automatically, arranging brittle wood and scraps of newspaper he found in a cabinet nearby. Soon a small flame flickered alive, casting warm gold across the stone walls. Shadows shifted slowly around the room like silent memories. Outside, wind swept against the mountain with a hollow whistle that sounded almost human in the distance. Elias heated a dented can of soup over the fire while snow continued falling beyond the windows. The warmth softened the ache in his shoulders, but the emptiness inside him remained untouched. He thought about the house he had lost that morning, about the silence after the door closed behind him for the last time. Funny how quickly a man could disappear from his own life. Rook suddenly stood upright beside the stove. His ears lifted sharply. Then the German shepherd placed one paw directly against the wooden floorboards and looked back at Elias with wide alert eyes. The vibration returned beneath the room. Stronger now. Elias slowly set down the spoon in his hand. The floor beneath the stove gave a soft shudder. A thin trail of dust slipped through a crack between the boards. Then came a sound that made the veteran's heartbeat stop for half a second. Somewhere far below them, beneath layers of stone and earth, something heavy moved in the darkness underground. The sound beneath the floor vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the whisper of snow against the windows. Elias remained still beside the hearth, one hand resting near the old cast-iron poker leaning against the stones. Across the room, Rook stood frozen near the stove, his broad chest rising slowly as he listened to something hidden far below the mountain. The German shepherd's ears twitched toward the floor again. Then came 3 soft taps of his paw against the boards. Deliberate, measured. The same signal he had once used overseas whenever his instincts caught something human eyes could not see. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. He rose slowly and crossed the room. The old wooden floor creaked beneath his boots while the firelight stretched long shadows along the stone walls. Dust floated lazily through the air like pale smoke suspended in time. Rook lowered his nose toward the narrow space beneath the stove and released a quiet whine. Elias crouched beside him and brushed away layers of dust with his gloved hand. At first he saw nothing except warped boards darkened by age. Then his fingers touched metal. He paused. Buried beneath the dirt and ash was a small iron shape nearly invisible against the floor. Elias scraped away more debris carefully until a rusted emblem revealed itself beneath the grime. His breath caught. It was an old military insignia, worn nearly smooth by time, but still recognizable. An eagle framed by crossed tools beneath a faded star. Army Corps of Engineers. Elias stared at it silently, while memories surfaced from places he usually tried not to visit. Flooded roads. Temporary bridges under freezing rain. Men working through smoke and darkness while the earth trembled beneath them. He remembered the feeling of trusting vibrations more than sight. The way the ground could speak if a soldier learned how to listen. Rook suddenly backed away from the stove and looked toward the fireplace across the room. His tail lowered slightly. Another vibration moved beneath the house. Stronger now. Elias felt it through one knee pressed against the floorboards. The lantern on the table rattled softly. Somewhere deep underground came the faint sound of metal striking stone. Clang. Then silence again. Elias stood slowly. "All right," he whispered under his breath. "What are you trying to show me?" The wind outside moaned through cracks in the stone walls like distant voices carried across frozen hills. He grabbed the lantern from the table and moved toward the fireplace, while Rook stayed close beside him. The fire flickered low, casting warm gold over the black granite stones rising to the ceiling. Something about the structure looked strange now that he stood closer. The mortar lines along the lower stones did not match the rest. Cleaner, straighter, almost newer despite the age of the house. Rook stepped forward and pressed his nose against the far edge of the hearth. Then he scratched once, twice. Elias knelt again and brushed ash away from the base of the fireplace. Hidden beneath soot and years of dust was another symbol carved directly into the stone, a triangle surrounding a small cross. Below it were faint numbers barely visible in the firelight. 1947. A cold silence settled over the room. Elias had seen markings like that before in abandoned relief shelters overseas. Safe zones built quietly after wars ended. Places meant to disappear from maps. Rook suddenly turned his head sharply toward the wall beside the fireplace. His ears lifted high. Then the German shepherd barked once into the silence. Deep behind the stone came the unmistakable sound of gears slowly turning somewhere underneath the mountain. The sound of turning gears echoed faintly through the stone wall before fading back into silence. Elias remained kneeling beside the fireplace, one hand resting against the cold granite while the fire crackled behind him. Rook stood motionless nearby, staring at the wall with the fixed concentration of an animal following instincts older than reason itself. Snow continued falling outside, soft against the windows, swallowing the mountain in white darkness. Then another vibration rolled beneath the house. Longer this time. The floor trembled gently beneath Elias's boots. Somewhere inside the wall came a dull metallic click. He narrowed his eyes and slid his fingers carefully along the edge of the stone beneath the carved symbol. The granite felt rough beneath his glove until suddenly one section shifted slightly inward beneath the pressure. Elias froze. A deep, grinding sound moved through the fireplace like the mountain itself waking from a long sleep. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the massive hearth began sliding several inches sideways across the floor. Cold air poured from the darkness revealed behind it. Rook stepped back immediately, ears high, tail rigid. Beyond the opening stretched a narrow stone staircase, descending into blackness below the house. Elias stared silently for several seconds, lantern trembling faintly in his hand. The staircase looked ancient, yet strangely untouched. The edges of the steps remained sharp beneath a thin layer of dust, as though generations had carefully protected this place from the world above. A faint draft carried the scent of old cedar, machine oil, and damp stone. Upward from below, the veteran swallowed slowly. "Well," he whispered under his breath, "that explains the heartbeat." Rook moved toward the entrance carefully, sniffing the cold air flowing from underground. The German shepherd did not bark. He simply looked back toward Elias once, as though asking whether they were finally ready to follow whatever had called them here through the storm. Elias grabbed his old army flashlight from his backpack and checked the batteries. The weak beam flickered alive. Between the flashlight and lantern, enough light pushed back the darkness to reveal the first several steps descending beneath the mountain. He hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The stone staircase spiraled downward slowly, disappearing deeper into the earth with each turn. Water dripped faintly somewhere below. Their footsteps echoed softly through the narrow shaft while shadows shifted across walls carved directly into the mountain rock. Elias noticed strange details as they descended. Brass pipes ran along sections of the wall. Old electrical wires disappeared into the stone ceiling overhead. Every 20 feet, another faded military symbol had been painted beside the stairs, nearly erased by time. Army Corps insignias. Emergency relief markings. Shelter codes. The deeper they went, the quieter the world above became. Soon the storm outside disappeared entirely, replaced by a stillness so complete Elias could hear Rook breathing beside him. It reminded him of underground shelters during deployments overseas. Those strange moments between danger and safety where silence felt heavier than noise. After nearly 2 minutes of descending, the staircase finally opened into a massive underground corridor. Elias stopped in disbelief. The lantern light revealed smooth stone walls reinforced with old steel beams stretching far into the darkness. Along one side hung dusty American flags and faded wartime photographs sealed behind cracked glass. On the other side stood wooden benches, supply shelves, and rusted lanterns arranged with careful precision. It was not a bunker. It was something gentler. A refuge. The air felt warmer here. Alive somehow. Rook walked slowly into the corridor, nails clicking softly against the stone floor. Then the German shepherd suddenly paused near a doorway ahead. His ears lifted sharply. Elias followed the dog's gaze and felt his chest tighten. Painted above the old wooden door were words faded by decades, but still visible beneath the dust. St. Mercy's Sanctuary. Underneath the lettering, someone had carefully added a smaller sentence by hand long ago. For those the world forgot. The words above the doorway seemed to settle into the silence like a prayer left waiting decades for someone to hear it again. Elias stood motionless beneath the faded sign, while the lantern glow trembled softly against the stone corridor. St. Mercy's Sanctuary. For those the world forgot. Something tightened quietly inside his chest. Rook stepped forward first, moving through the doorway with slow, careful steps. The old wooden door groaned faintly as Elias pushed it wider. Warm air drifted outward, carrying the scent of cedar wood, old paper, and something impossibly gentle beneath the dust. Cinnamon. Soap. Faint traces of lives once protected here. The room beyond opened into a vast underground chamber carved directly beneath the mountain. Elias stopped breathing for a moment. It looked less like a bunker and more like a hidden village frozen in time. Rows of small iron beds lined one side of the sanctuary, each covered with neatly folded wool blankets preserved beneath layers of dust. Along the far wall stood wooden bookshelves filled with faded children's books, jars of crayons, worn board games, and handmade toys carved from pine. A chalkboard still hung near the center of the room, with faint writing barely visible beneath the years. Kindness keeps the light alive. Elias slowly lowered the lantern. Dear God, he whispered. Rook wandered quietly between the beds, his nails clicking softly against the stone floor. Unlike upstairs, the dog no longer growled. His posture had softened. Come now, as if whatever called them here did not wish them harm. Elias walked farther into the sanctuary while shadows flickered gently along the curved ceiling overhead. Thick support beams reinforced the chamber, and old emergency lights lined the walls, though none still worked. In one corner sat a cast-iron stove surrounded by tiny wooden chairs. Nearby, shelves held canned food, medical kits, folded quilts, and lantern oil carefully labeled by hand. Everything had been arranged with care, not for survival alone, but for comfort, for dignity. The mountain above groaned softly beneath the storm, while silence wrapped around the underground refuge like a blanket. Elias paused beside a long wall covered in framed black and white photographs. Children smiled back at him from another century. Some held stuffed animals. Others wore oversized winter coats beside men in military uniforms. Veterans, engineers, medics, ordinary people with exhausted eyes and gentle expressions. Beneath each photograph were handwritten dates stretching from the late 1940s into the early 70s. Rook suddenly stopped beside a small wooden desk near the back of the chamber. His ears twitched once before he nudged something carefully with his nose. Elias approached slowly. Resting on the desk beneath a layer of dust sat an old reel-to-reel recorder beside stacks of journals tied neatly with leather straps. A single lantern hung above the desk, and somehow its glass remained perfectly clean despite the decades. Elias brushed dust from one journal cover. The leather cracked softly beneath his fingertips. Embossed on the front were simple words. Caretaker Records. He opened the first page carefully. The handwriting inside looked steady and patient. January 12, 1951. The storm brought 3 more children tonight. Cold, frightened, hungry. The veterans stayed awake, through morning repairing the heating pipes. No one complained. They never do. Elias swallowed hard as he turned another page. February 3rd, 1951. The mountain protected us again tonight. Little Clara finally smiled for the first time in weeks after Sergeant Hale carved her a wooden fox. Sometimes healing begins with the smallest mercies. Rook lay quietly beside the desk while Elias continued reading beneath the lantern glow. Snow rumbled faintly above the mountain. The sanctuary felt impossibly alive despite the years of silence. Then, somewhere deeper beyond the chamber walls, a bell rang softly underground. One clear note drifting through the darkness like an echo from another lifetime. The bell echoed once through the sanctuary before fading into the stone like a memory returning to sleep. Elias slowly lifted his head from the journals while the lantern light flickered softly across the underground chamber. Beside him, Rook remained perfectly still, ears raised toward the darkness beyond the walls. The German shepherd did not appear frightened anymore. If anything, he looked attentive, respectful, as though he had stepped into sacred ground. Elias closed the journal carefully and glanced deeper into the sanctuary. Beyond the rows of beds and shelves of preserved supplies, another corridor stretched farther beneath the mountain. A faint amber glow shimmered somewhere in the distance, barely visible through the shadows. "You hear that too?" he whispered. Rook stood immediately and began walking toward the corridor without hesitation. Elias grabbed the lantern and followed. The deeper passageway felt narrower than the main chamber, its curved walls lined with old copper pipes that hummed faintly beneath the stone. Water dripped rhythmically somewhere overhead. The air carried a strange warmth now, almost comforting against the cold storm raging above the mountain. Along the corridor hung more photographs. Veterans beside children. Families gathered around Christmas trees underground. Smiling faces holding bowls of soup and handmade blankets. In every image there was the same feeling Elias could not quite explain. Safety. The kind people build for strangers when the world outside grows too heavy to survive alone. Rook suddenly paused near a wooden door, standing slightly open at the end of the hallway. Light spilled faintly through the crack. Not electric light. Softer than that. Golden. Elias approached cautiously and pushed the door wider. Inside was a small chapel carved directly into the mountain stone. He stopped breathing for a moment. Candles lined the walls, though none had burned in decades. A wooden cross hung above a simple altar draped in faded blue cloth. Rows of benches faced forward beneath a ceiling painted with tiny stars that still shimmered faintly in the lantern glow. Dust rested over everything except one object. A reel-to-reel tape machine sitting carefully on the altar itself. Beside it lay a note. The handwriting looked old but steady. "If you are hearing this, the mountain remembered you." Elias stared at the note while a strange heaviness settled quietly in his chest. Rook moved beside the altar and sat down calmly, tail resting against the stone floor. The dog's amber eyes stayed fixed on the tape machine. Elias hesitated before pressing the rusted playback switch. At first, only static filled the chapel. Then a man's voice emerged softly through the crackling speaker. Old, gentle, tired in the way kind people often are. "Tonight the snow is falling hard above St. Mercy's sanctuary. If you found this place, then perhaps the world has wounded you too." Elias lowered his eyes slowly. The voice continued. "My name is Reverend Nathan Hale. 40 years ago, a group of veterans built this refuge beneath the mountain for children left behind after the war. Some had no families. Some had no homes. Some had forgotten how to trust kindness at all." The tape hissed softly between sentences while the mountain groaned faintly overhead. "We were soldiers once. Engineers. Medics. Mechanics. Men who carried too much silence home with us. But down here we learned something important. Sometimes the broken are the only ones who know how to build shelter for others." Elias felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. Rook rested his head gently against the veteran's knee without taking his eyes off the tape recorder. The old voice grew quieter now. "If you came here with a shepherd beside you, then the sanctuary chose correctly. There was always supposed to be another caretaker one day." Elias frowned slightly. Then the tape crackled again. "The dog will know where the final room waits. Trust him when the bells ring." At that exact moment, somewhere deeper beneath the chapel, a second bell rang through the mountain. The second bell rolled through the mountain with a deeper tone than the first, vibrating gently through the chapel floor beneath Elias's boots. The sound lingered in the underground silence like something alive moving through stone. Rook stood immediately, his ears lifted high, and for the first time since entering the sanctuary, the German shepherd looked restless again. Not afraid. Focused. The dog turned toward the back wall of the chapel where shadows pooled thickly beneath the painted ceiling stars. Elias grabbed the lantern and followed him carefully. The old tape recorder continued spinning softly behind them, while Reverend Hale's final words echoed through his thoughts. Trust him when the bells ring. Rook stopped near a narrow section of wall partly hidden behind a bookshelf filled with hymnals and weathered journals. Dust coated the shelves in pale gray layers untouched for decades. The German shepherd sniffed the stone carefully, then pressed his shoulder gently against the wood. Something shifted faintly behind it. Elias frowned and set the lantern down nearby. Together, man and dog pushed the shelf sideways with a long groan of old hinges hidden beneath the floor. Behind it appeared another doorway carved directly into the mountain. Cold air drifted outward, carrying the scent of damp earth and ancient paper. Elias lifted the lantern again. Beyond the hidden entrance stretched a smaller passageway, descending deeper underground. Unlike the sanctuary corridors above, this tunnel looked unfinished. Raw stone surrounded them, rough and uneven beneath decades of mineral stains. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling into narrow channels carved along the floor. The deeper they walked, the stronger the strange warmth in the mountain became. Not heat exactly. Presence. Elias could not explain it any other way. The tunnel finally opened into a circular chamber beneath the chapel. He stopped in stunned silence. The room was enormous. Shelves lined the curved walls from floor to ceiling, packed tightly with metal document boxes, leather ledgers, and thousands of carefully preserved files. At the center of the chamber stood a large oak table illuminated by a single hanging lantern somehow still glowing with faint amber light. Above the table hung another American flag, hand-stitched and worn soft with age. Beneath it, carved into the stone wall in large, careful letters, were words that made Elias's chest tighten. No one who enters here leaves forgotten. Rook wandered slowly around the chamber, nose moving from one box to another as though searching for something specific. Elias approached the table carefully. Stacks of records rested there beneath sheets of yellowed glassine paper. Birth certificates, adoption records, medical reports, hundreds of names. Children hidden and protected by the sanctuary after the war. Some had eventually been reunited with families. Others had been quietly adopted across the country under new identities. Elias turned another page slowly. Many of the signatures belonged to veterans who had stayed underground for years helping care for the children. Engineers, nurses, mechanics, men and women who had come home carrying grief and found healing by protecting those even more broken than themselves. Rook suddenly stopped beside a small locked chest resting near the far wall. He barked once, sharp and clear inside the chamber. Elias crossed the room and knelt beside the box. Unlike everything else underground, the chest looked polished, preserved carefully. On top rested another note written in the same steady handwriting from the chapel. For the next caretaker. Elias opened the lid slowly. Inside lay a stack of legal documents bound with faded blue ribbon. Land deeds, bank records, trust agreements. The sanctuary had secretly owned hundreds of acres surrounding the mountain for generations, along with a massive relief fund left untouched since the 1970s. But beneath the papers rested something else. A photograph. Elias stared at it in disbelief. The picture showed a much younger Reverend Hale, standing beside a German shepherd nearly identical to Rook. On the back, someone had written a single sentence in fading ink. The shepherds always find the way home. The photograph trembled slightly in Elias's hands while the lantern above the chamber swayed with a faint metallic creak. He stared at the old German shepherd beside Reverend Hale, unable to ignore the resemblance. The same alert ears, the same pale cream markings. Around the chest, even the eyes looked familiar, wise in the way only loyal animals sometimes seem to be. Rook sat quietly nearby watching him, his amber gaze steady beneath the soft underground light. Snow rumbled faintly somewhere far above the mountain, but down in the chamber the silence felt almost holy. Elias lowered the photograph carefully and looked again at the stacks of records surrounding him. Thousands of lives hidden beneath the earth. Thousands of stories the world above had forgotten. Yet somehow this place had endured while everything else faded away. He moved slowly around the chamber, opening more boxes beneath the lantern glow. Letters from families. Drawings made by children safe inside the sanctuary during winter storms. Photographs of birthday cakes baked underground. Veterans teaching boys how to repair radios. Women sewing blankets beside the old stoves. Every image carried the same quiet message. Broken people had built this place so others would not feel abandoned. Elias stopped beside another ledger and opened it carefully. A list of names stretched across the yellowed pages beneath handwritten notes. Many entries ended with a single phrase beside them. Return to the light. He swallowed hard. For years he had believed survival meant learning how to carry loneliness without collapsing beneath it. But here beneath the mountain, he was beginning to understand something different. Survival could also mean letting yourself belong somewhere again. Rook suddenly stood and turned toward the staircase tunnel leading back toward the sanctuary. His ears twitched sharply. Elias heard it a second later. Voices. Faint at first, then clearer. Human voices echoing somewhere above the underground corridors. He frowned and grabbed the lantern. By the time he and Rook climbed back toward the main sanctuary chamber, daylight had begun filtering weakly through cracks near the ceiling overhead. The storm outside had passed during the night. At the far end of the sanctuary stood 3 elderly figures bundled in heavy winter coats. A park ranger accompanied them carrying a flashlight. The moment Elias stepped into view, all 4 people froze and stunned. Silence. One of the elderly women lifted trembling fingers toward the walls lined with photographs. Tears immediately filled her pale blue eyes. It is still here, she whispered softly. The ranger lowered his flashlight slowly. We saw smoke from the chimney this morning, he explained carefully. Nobody has lived in this house for over 40 years. Elias glanced toward the sanctuary around them. The old woman stepped forward shakily, staring at the rows of beds and faded chalkboards. My name is Clara Whitmore, she said through trembling breath. I lived here when I was 7 years old. Elias felt the room grow still around her words. Another elderly man removed his hat slowly while staring at one of the wartime photographs hanging nearby. That is Sergeant Hale, he whispered. He saved my sister during the blizzard of 1952. The sanctuary seemed to breathe quietly around them as memory returned to the underground halls after decades of silence. Tears rolled gently down Clara's face while she touched the edge of one small iron bed. We thought this place was destroyed, she said. Nobody believed us anymore. Rook walked slowly to her side and rested his head gently against her hand. The woman smiled through tears and stroked the German shepherd's fur with trembling fingers. The shepherds always came first, she whispered softly. Whenever danger came, they always knew before anyone else. Elias stood silently beneath the lantern glow while sunlight slowly reached the sanctuary for the first time in decades. Somewhere above the mountain, wind moved gently through the pine trees. But underground, something far older than the storm had finally found its way back into the light. Spring arrived slowly over Black Hollow Ridge, melting the heavy snow into silver streams that wound through the pine forests below the mountain. Morning sunlight touched the old stone house differently now. Warmer, softer. The chimney breathed thin ribbons of smoke into the blue sky, while wind moved gently through the cedar branches surrounding the ridge. For the first time in decades, laughter echoed faintly inside the mountain again. Elias stood near the front porch with a mug of coffee warming his hands while Rook rested beside the steps, watching golden lights spill across the valley below. The German shepherd looked peaceful in the quiet dawn, his silver and cream coat glowing softly beneath the rising sun. Months had passed since the sanctuary was rediscovered beneath the mountain. What began as whispers among locals had slowly spread across the state. Reporters came first, historians after that, then families. Elderly men and women arrived carrying faded photographs and forgotten names, climbing the winding road with tears already waiting in their eyes before they even reached the stone house. Some had once slept in the underground sanctuary as frightened children during brutal winters after the war. Others had been sons and daughters of the veterans who built the refuge beneath the mountain stone. One by one, the hidden story returned to the surface like light breaking through frozen water. Elias never intended to stay. Yet somehow the mountain had quietly closed its hand around his wounded life and refused to let him drift away again. The legal trust connected to St. Mercy Sanctuary provided enough funding to restore both the underground refuge and the land surrounding it. But Elias used the money carefully. Not for himself, never for luxury. Instead, the old sanctuary became something living once more. Veterans struggling to rebuild their lives arrived from nearby towns. Some stayed for a week, some for months. A few never left at all. Together they repaired the stone house, restored the underground classrooms, rebuilt the gardens outside, and reopened the sanctuary kitchens for anyone who needed warmth during the long mountain winters. No questions asked, no shame carried through the doors. Only shelter, only kindness. Rook became part of the sanctuary in ways nobody could explain. Visitors often said the German shepherd seemed to know exactly when someone arrived carrying grief too heavy to speak aloud. He would quietly walk to them, sit beside their chair, and remain there until the silence inside them softened. Clara Whitmore visited often that spring. So did many of the surviving sanctuary children now, grown old with silver hair and weathered hands. One afternoon, she brought a small wooden box she had kept hidden for over 60 years. Inside rested dozens of handwritten thank you letters from children once protected beneath the mountain. Elias spent hours reading them beside the fireplace at night while rain tapped softly against the windows. Thank you for keeping the lights on. Thank you for making soup when we were afraid. Thank you for teaching us the world still had kind people in it. Sometimes he would look up from the letters and simply sit there quietly while the fire crackled through the old stone house. The loneliness that once followed him like winter fog no longer felt endless now. It had not disappeared completely. Some scars never truly leave. But beneath this roof and beneath the mountain below, he had finally found something stronger than isolation. Belonging. Late one evening after the sanctuary had fallen silent, Elias stepped outside beneath a sky crowded with stars. Pine trees whispered softly along the ridge, while cool spring wine drifted through the valley below. Rook settled beside him near the porch steps, resting his head gently against Elias's knee. Far beneath their feet, deep within the hidden sanctuary carved into the mountain, a faint vibration moved once through the stone. Slow, steady, like a final heartbeat easing peacefully into rest. Elias smiled softly toward the dark forest and placed one hand against the old house wall beside him. The stone no longer felt cold. Somewhere beyond the wind and the quiet breathing of the mountain, it almost felt as though the sanctuary itself had finally gone to sleep knowing someone kind had come home at last. Hi friend, before you go, if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you why respect matters, please hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. And share this video so more people around the world can hear stories that deserve to be heard. Your support helps keep stories like this alive. Thank you for listening, story.